you. Actually, Martin, would you come back here for a second? I want to demonstrate something. So, in my opinion, there's not enough physical contact in the workplace. And sorry. I don't want to give the wrong impression. I'm talking about high fives. High fives are physical contact we can all do that there's nothing unpleasant or untoward about it, but I have a problem with high fives. I've spent most of my life failing at high fives and being afraid when people put their hands up that I would miss, because I always missed. I'll demonstrate. So Martin, if you'd give me a high five now. Oh my God. This is the worst feeling, especially with an audience, but there's a trick. Some of you may know the trick, but I'll share this trick with you. This is my gift to all of you. If you watch the elbow of the person who you're high-fiving, you get a great high five every time, a great high five every time. So again, watching my elbow, I'll watch yours. Oh, it's beautiful. Thank you, Martin, thank you. So, thank you. So I actually want to have all of you stand up right now. I know it's early. Some of you may be British, but I want you to stand up. Everybody stand up. Stand up. Thank you. Yeah, stand up. And I want you to watch the elbow, high five your neighbor to the left, to the right. Don't leave anybody hanging. High fives all around. High fives. All right. Awesome. It works, right? It's amazing. 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 It's an amazing technique. Amazing, something so simple, you know, it's a simple trick. We may get back to that theme, but I just thought, well, you've been a great audience. I'll talk to you later. No, seriously, I'm going to tell you all about this book so that you don't have to read it, because that would be, it's miserable. So I'm going to just kind of today tell you what's in the book. And I want to start way back at the beginning. So we're going to travel back in time to the beginning of this design sprint process. This indicates traveling back in time, in case you're wondering what that means. We're traveling back in time all the way to the turn of the century and the year 2001. So a long time ago. You can see the sepia tones there, implying that it's a long time ago. In 2001, I worked at Microsoft, and I worked on a product called the Encarta Encyclopedia. For those of you who don't know what an encyclopedia is, it's a bunch of books. Here's the Encyclopedia Britannica. This is what I had when I was a kid. And the Encyclopedia Britannica from the 1700s until the 1990s was kind of the state of the art of information. All the information in the world was in these books. You could just look through, find whatever you need, flip through. And then Microsoft came out with the Encarta Encyclopedia. Here's Steve Ballmer, CEO of Microsoft at the time, talking about this encyclopedia. It's amazing. What was so amazing was that the Encarta Encyclopedia was on not a bunch of books, but a CD-ROM. And for those of you who don't remember what a CD-ROM is, it's like a little silver frisbee with data stored on it. You could put it in your computer. Anyway, there were about 6 of them to have the encyclopedia. Arguably not as convenient as books, but it was pretty cool. And I worked on the Encarta Encyclopedia. There were great articles, photos, videos, 3D tours, all kinds of awesome stuff in the encyclopedia. 2001, we're just dominating the digital encyclopedia market, which, I mean, you know, something. And this product came out that's, you know, was kind of cute, kind of a cute little thing they got there. We talked about it around the office. This is an interesting idea. Anybody can write an encyclopedia article. It's free. It's right online. It's kind of a novelty. Pretty interesting. Time passes. We're still feeling pretty good about ourselves. 2003, Wikipedia starts looking a little bit more sophisticated. And at this point, it's got more articles in it than the Encarta Encyclopedia. And there's another problem, because people are going online increasingly. They're running a search when they want information. And as you know, you run a search on Google, you get a Wikipedia article, and the content's not always great, but it's always there. It's always free. So as you can imagine, we were alarmed by this. We knew this was going to affect our market share, and we had to figure out something to do. So we did what you do in these situations. We had meetings, we brainstormed. I went off in my sort of desk and came up with ideas and tried to pitch them and argue for my way of thinking. And I actually was able to convince the team that we should do my idea, which was I'm a designer, to redesign the encyclopedia to really showcase how good our content was, how much better it was than what you could get for free on Wikipedia. So I convinced them. I convinced them to do my idea, and we built it. And it took a while. You know, we had to design it, spec it out, build it, test it, all those things. In the end, here's the encyclopedia. You have to remember, this is a long time ago, but this was very futuristic. It's three-dimensional. It's kind of spinning around, grabbing information, opening it up, you know, and we were pretty excited about this. So engineering team, we finish this, and we send it off to be manufactured, printed on compact discs. And so we're feeling good, but we did have to sell it at this point. We still had to sell what we had created. And in those days, you may not remember, but there was no app store. If you wanted to buy an app, you had to go to a store. And so the software was in boxes on the store, and you would, you know, you'd look at all the boxes and you'd say, oh, this is interesting, and you'd turn it over and look at the specs. I wonder if I want to take that home. And you'd have to decide if it was worth your while. So if it was, then, you know, great. And the box was important. So you'd think that what we would have put on the box would be, well, the name of the product would make sense, a big picture of it so you'd know all of our hard work, you could see what we'd done, and some compelling description of it would also be nice, something that made it sound great, but that's not what we did. That's not what we did at all. It's a slight error in planning where we did all this, and then kind of right at the last minute, brought in the marketing team, and we said, hey, look at what we built. Isn't this fantastic? And don't you think people were going to want to just talk about this on the box? And they were like, I don't know if that's what people are going to want to pay for. We do have these few discovery videos that we've added, and I think, we're like, no, but we. So anyway, they hired an outside agency to build the box, so another sort of layer of communication. This was the box. It's a big picture of President George W. Bush on the front, big Discovery Channel logo. I remember when we thought President Bush was bad. And then if you look really closely, you might notice, if you have really good vision, that it says here, 5-point font, new visual browser, which I don't even know what that means. Anyway, so you can tell, I'm a little bitter about this, but so I probably don't have to tell you what happened in this story. In fact, Encarta's gone today, and if you go online, if you go to Google and you search for Encarta, the first results that you'll see. It says Microsoft Encarta was digital. Oh God. Oh man, so many years of my life. But I do wonder if I could go back in time, if I really did have a time machine, what could have changed and how it could have changed the course of events with the Encarta Encyclopedia. And one thing that seems pretty obvious is it might have been a good idea to talk to those folks a little sooner. Maybe we could have convinced them, maybe they could have convinced us. That probably would have been good. One thing that's clear is we were not thinking about the moment in the store. We were thinking about the heart of the problem, the engineering, the design, the product. Once you had it on your computer, we were thinking about making that as great as possible. But this other key moment was actually in the store. That was like the elbow. The product was the hand, and we should have been thinking about the elbow. And the other thing we didn't think about, you know, there's all these other ideas we didn't try out. We thought some were too risky. One of those ideas was to give the articles away for free online, to make them free competitors online, peers of the Wikipedia articles, and they were better. The articles were professionally written. They had photos, videos that we had paid for. They were really excellent. So would that have made a difference when people ran a search? I don't know. I don't know if it would have made a difference in the long run, but maybe it would have helped Microsoft. At any rate, that was actually the elbow of the problem. And we should have been watching the elbow the whole time. Instead, we were too focused on the hand. Well, we'll move on from that little sad story. The year 2007, I left Microsoft. I went to go work at Google because I'm a traitor, and I was really, at this point, really interested in how products are developed and how people spend their time, organize their time. And I was really excited to find out, how do they do it at Google? Google had this reputation for being, for a large company, very fast and nimble. And I really wanted to find out how they went from an idea to launching. And so I got inside, and it turned out that it was pretty much the exact same thing, actually. The engineers would have this idea, they would build it, and then they would, could you explain, at the last second to the marketers, could you explain, we have this thing, Google Wave, do you think that people might? The marketers are like, oh God, why did you? Yeah, so anyway, this is what happened. But there was another kind of project there where the engineers would have an idea and it would just never launch. It would just never launch. They would just kind of tinker on it, 20% time, kind of tinkering. And actually, I participated in one of these projects. We had an idea in 2007 for this thing that we called Google Meeting. We thought it'd be really cool if you could have a multi-user video conference right in the web browser. And at that time, you usually get with Skype with like a downloaded app. But we thought right in the browser, you could have multiple video channels. And we thought we had like all the back-end tech to make it work. And so me and a couple of, an engineer and a PM, we kind of just tinker on this. And we did this in 2007, 2008. And finally in 2009, we got together for a week and we said, I visited them. They worked in Stockholm, and I went to Stockholm in January for a week. I don't know if any of you have been in Stockholm in January, but if you haven't, I have a photo of it here. It's a joke, it's a black photo, because it's really dark. It's really dark and cold. It's fairly miserable outside, so you really would, it's a great time to focus. It's a great time to focus. So we all cleared all the calendar of everything, and we got in a room and we just said, we're going to focus on this thing together. So we said, like, how should this thing look? How should it work? Let's try to make a prototype in 1 week. And we did. We kind of mocked up this sort of rough idea of how it should work. And if you look carefully, you can see me without a beard. And then the engineer built a prototype of that very simple thing. And it's very, crude and simple. These are just thumbnails down at the bottom, not video feeds. But it was the fundamental idea worked. And the prototype we actually were able to share with our teammates, and we started having video calls using this thing, and then we started sharing it around the company, and pretty soon all of Google was using this thing because it was real. It wasn't just us talking on the whiteboard. It was pretty cool. Eventually this thing in 2011 launched as Google Hangouts, and actually just this year in 2017 it launched as what we intended, which was software for meetings. So in a way that actually took 10 years, but what I thought was really cool about it was that we went from this kind of thing to this. Somehow we had gotten like all of the work that we needed to do, we had focused in a much different way, and we had gotten to the heart of the problem much, much faster. Effectively, I looked back on that, I thought, the elbow of that, kind of the key moment was that week. And I started to wonder about this idea of design. I'm a designer. I had historically been designing products. I had worked on Gmail and Google Talk and then Hangouts while I was at Google, but I started thinking about how I might design time differently. And if there was a way to structure time so that you recreated a moment like we had in Stockholm. So if you remember back, I want you to think back to when you started your current job, and hopefully when you started your job, you were excited about it. If you're a founder, maybe you founded the company, and I hope you were excited about it. But if you hate your job, just imagine. But so you imagine this moment, and you're like really excited about it. It's the first day of work. You come in, you've got a new email address, no messages in your inbox. You've got a new, your calendar is totally free, and you've got this, you're excited, and you're like, all right, let's do this. Great. And you start to meet your new, smart, insightful, funny, charming, vaguely attractive teammates, and you're like, all right, and you start having like one-on-one meetings with them, and you start being invited to projects, and you're like, all right, we are cooking, we are doing this thing. And like you've got stuff going on, and you're like, I'm in the flow. And then, pretty soon, so more stuff on your calendar, and then like after a while, you've got a lot of stuff on the calendar, and then you're like, you gotta like color code it to kind of keep track of what's going on. And then pretty soon you're just like, oh God, oh my God. And it's just like, it just feels like this, like you're just like trying to like, it's like you're just trying to survive and like cross the street, And so, like this. So a lot of times this is how work feels. Like there's an important thing, but you can just barely get across the road. But I started to wonder if you could design your time rather than just kind of reacting to all of these defaults, what could happen? So I started to sort of this quest for a perfect week, designing a perfect week. And in 2010, I started running these experiments around Google. I called this a design sprint, and because it sounded appealing to engineers, it's fast. And so the idea with the design sprint was, I'd do it with one team, do it with another team. I did one with Gmail, did one with Google Ads, with Hangouts, Chrome, Google X. And it started to sort of work better and better, tried to refine the process. In 2012, I left Google and went to go work at Google Ventures, another Alphabet company. And Google Ventures invests in startups. And so as someone who's really like a dork about process, I was super excited to learn how startups go from an idea to launch. Like what happens when they go from, because you'd think really fast. Turns out, pretty much the exact same thing as everybody else. Now this is not exactly the way the mental model that people have at startups, as some of you know. I mean, the idea is you get an idea, get it out there, and get data on it. This is a really smart philosophy. It's kind of lean startup. We're going to do a quick loop, and it's really smart because then you don't commit to something forever and get stuck with it, as we did. But what happens is that most people interpret this as we must launch an MVP. To get that data, we need to build and launch an MVP because then we'll have perfect real-world data that we'll be able to trust. And the challenge comes in building things. It always takes longer to build a high enough quality product, and so you end up with effectively the same thing. And at the end, you try to tell the marketing team, please explain it. So the idea with a sprint at a venture capital firm, when we were trying to have our startups be as successful as possible, was to give them a shortcut, a way to get that data in just a week. So we tried to perfect that design of the perfect week so that you could collect data. So I've run over 150 sprints by this point, and in my time at Google Ventures, we really kind of got to what I think is the perfect week. And I'm gonna just quickly kind of tell you about it this morning. So it all starts with a challenge, and hopefully it's like similar to when you start your new job and it's something you're excited about, something big, but it could be a new feature, a new product, whatever. And you assemble a team that's diverse. It's not just the product team, just the design team, just the engineering team, or some special creative team. It's the real team with representatives from marketing, for instance. And you take a week of time on the calendar, clear all the meetings, and then run a specific script during that week. And the idea is to get rid of all those defaults and reactions that we normally have and instead follow a system. So in some ways it's like giving a high five. It's like the system for the high five is if you watch the elbow, you get better results. It's a little counterintuitive. One of the key defaults is that teams are often fragmented. We're in all those different meetings, we have different projects, we have different stand-ups. And instead, in a sprint, everybody gets together in the same room. So it happens, the whole week happens in one room together with me, with my eyes closed. No, but you're all together in the same room. In the book, Sprint, I've got kind of a step-by-step guide for how to run this process. And it's a checklist at the end of the book. It's literally 15 pages. It tells you like when to do this, when to do that, minute by minute, when you can go to the bathroom. It's very, very specific. But I won't go through all the details now. I just want to tell you about what happens on each day of the sprint. There's kind of one key focal point each day. On Monday, the idea is to make a map of the problem. And in the common way that I've experienced approaching products, it's hard to not think of everything all at once, all of the complexity of the product. In the sprint, we want to force focus on one key moment. So it's that idea of trying to find the spot, as we did and didn't do at Encarta, of the moment when the customer's picking up the box or the moment when the customer's running a web search. It's thinking outside the product. So here's an example. You can see a very simple map, customers on the left, how they move through, in this case, some software for cancer care clinics. And in this case, it's choosing one customer and one spot on that map where you're going to focus for the rest of the week. On Tuesday, the whole team sketches solutions for that challenge that they've chosen. And the default for coming up with solutions as a team is usually a group brainstorm. Everybody's shouting out ideas, but working in this way really biases towards people who are extroverted, people who can make a convincing sales pitch for their idea, people who other people on the team think of as creative, and it does not allow for deep, quiet thinking. It doesn't allow for you to put a lot of detail behind your ideas. Often an abstract idea will triumph in a conference room when you're shouting things out, and it won't be as high quality over time. So in a sprint, we work alone, but we're together in the same room. It's a little weird. I mean, if you watch this video of it happening, everybody's kind of quietly, it looks like a test in school. But the idea is you have enough time to think through how you think the problem ought to be solved, that you can actually come up with a very high quality solution. And because people are working on their own, those solutions stay separate. This is what one of those sketches might look like. There's a lot of detail behind it. And by the end of the day, there's like 10 of them to choose from, 10 different approaches. So on Wednesday, you've got to decide which of those approaches you're going to go with and which one you think has the best chance of solving the problem. Often discussions and these kinds of decisions can be endless. We can probably talk for an unlimited amount of time to try to decide which way our team should go, especially if we know we're going to then commit weeks or months or a public launch or a lot of money to whatever decision we make. But in a sprint, we make those decisions fast and decisive by making them structured and a bit unnatural, actually. So we're following a bunch of steps, starting off by reviewing things in silence so that nobody's making a sales pitch for their idea. Doing a structured critique. It's very fast. It's not literally this fast, but it's quite fast. Everybody goes through, talks about the ideas, and again, with no sales pitch from the creator, tries to understand how they work. And then finally, rather than have the team collectively vote or have some kind of an argument about what's going to happen, the decision maker, one decision maker, makes the call about which idea will be tested. This is really helpful because it ensures the product stays opinionated. It ensures that the product choice reflects what the decision maker, the leader, wants. And it also makes that decision-making process totally transparent. Everybody can see how we got there. And on Thursday, the team's going to build a prototype. So they've got only 8 hours, and they want to make a realistic prototype so that they can then test it on Friday with target customers. And this sort of runs in the same philosophical vein as building an MVP. We want to build something as quickly as possible so we can get data. The change in definition is we're just going to build something fake that we can get reactions to in a one-on-one conversation. We're not going to worry about launching. So the idea with the sprint is you're just faking things, not actually building a full product. The team splits up the work so they can create as much surface area as possible in the prototype and stitches it back together. They can use simple tools like you might use Keynote or PowerPoint to build a prototype of a web app, a mobile app, an iPad app. And you can quite quickly stitch together screens that you've exported from a tool like Keynote into a tool like Flinto, Marvel, or InVision, and stitch those together with hotspots and make something that appears in just a few hours to look like a real app. So here's that same prototype on a phone, and it looks like a real app. It's very convincing. When you show customers this, they'll react to it as though it were something real. There's a prototype of an iPad app. It appears to be in the App Store. It looks like they're installing it from the App Store, but this app hasn't launched yet. Those are faked screens. This is just Keynote running full screen on an iPad. It appears to be real. It's possible to make prototypes of all kinds of things. I'll show you a few kind of weird examples. Packaging. So here's a company who prototyped the way they might deliver coffee in different sized boxes with different brands. Each package there actually has a different fake brand. They've printed out stickers to make it look real. It's possible to, in many cases, prototype something that's extremely complicated, like maybe a hardware, or in this case, it's a software that's actually for hedge funds to help them predict company performance. Instead of figuring out exactly how the product should work, they figured out what the specs might be and what they might charge for it, and then they built a very realistic sales deck, tested that instead. Service prototypes. You can also essentially create a play, a theater of your product. And in this case, this is a company it's a series of healthcare clinics, and they wanted to experiment with opening their clinics for pediatricians, so families with children are coming in. They prototyped it by setting up a stage, effectively, putting props out, things that they thought they would need if they had families coming in to the clinics. And they had a script. They had actors, basically people from the clinic, from the office, who would follow a specific set of steps when people came in. The doctors would behave in a certain way when they came back to examine the patients and talk to the families. And all this is something they could plan out in one day and then execute the next day. And you can even prototype snacks. So one company actually wanted to create a new kind of snack bar. It takes a long time to actually manufacture a snack bar in the way that, large scale. So what they did was bought a bunch of different snack bars, opened them up, and painstakingly cut them apart and sort of glued them back together with, I don't know, honey or something, and sort of created what might look like a snack bar, and then prototyped the packaging and wrapped those with very realistic, high-quality packaging. So on Friday, you've got your prototype, whatever it might be. It might be software, it might be a hardware device that you faked, it might be a snack bar of some kind. And the default that we usually have to follow when we're building products is to wait for perfect data. And so even if we're moving fast, we're often thinking, we've got to launch in order to get that perfect data. But in a sprint, you can get quick and dirty data right away. And we do that with something that's really usually very low status in most organizations. It's usually something we don't think of as being the way we find out if we're on track for product market fit. Just a one-on-one interview, just talking one-on-one to a customer with no sales pitch, showing them the prototype, asking them to think aloud, seeing if they can figure it out and move through it. This happens in one room, there's a video feed, and then in the next room, as those 5 interviews take place, the rest of the team can watch and take notes. They can see it all happen in real time. And this is almost like you've fast forwarded into the future and you're like peering through, you know, a lens at what might happen when your customers encounter your finished product before you've even started building it for real. So by the end of the day, there's these really clear patterns that emerge, and 5 people is actually enough to start to see these patterns in a way that gives you a gut feeling that you can trust about whether you're on track or not. So in this case, you've got 5 different customers in each column, and the same thing shows up again and again and again. We know that's something we need to pay attention to. Here's another example. Often in the first sprint, you'll come across a lot of failures. So here again is 5 different customers. Each column is a different customer. Everybody, except for the 5th guy who's having a great Friday afternoon, everybody else hated the product. And that's very important for them to know. But what typically happens in a sprint is a team will see the gaps between where they are and what their customers are expecting or understanding about the product, and they'll then be able to very quickly fix it. They're starting to understand that gap between their vision and where customers are, where the real world is, and they can shift. So this is quite common. Again, the same team the next week modify their product, ran another test, and you can see almost everything goes green. And so the common way that I've heard of teams applying the sprints into their regular process is that at the beginning of a quarter, maybe when they do OKRs, they're setting aside a week and maybe a couple days of the next week to run one sprint, fix the results of that sprint, test it again, and then they'll have enough confidence to go all the way through, build, and launch. So I've run a bunch of these sprints, and I won't bore you with telling you about all of them, but there is one that's pretty interesting that I really like to tell the story of. So if you don't mind, I'm going to share it. This company is called Savioke, and Savioke makes it's kind of an unusual combination of hardware and service. It's a hotel delivery robot. So I don't mean it delivers hotels. It works in a hotel, and it's actually about, well, a little shorter than this lectern here. And the robot would be near the front desk of the hotel. So if I was working at the front desk and it was especially busy, and I got a call, somebody calls and says they need a toothbrush, then I'm going to be able to open up this hatch on the top of the robot, put in a toothbrush, close the hatch again, and type in, you know, room 316. And then the robot, which is effectively like a little self-driving car, can then drive on its own and just kind of like navigate going around people and sort of get to the elevator, wirelessly call the elevator. So the elevator opens and it gets on and it's riding with people, you know, and then the doors open on the 3rd floor and it knows it's the 3rd floor, so it gets off and it's got this map. It knows where the 316 is, so it's going to go down the hall and watch out for people and like get there. And then when it gets to the room door, it triggers a phone call. So phone rings in the room and sort of a robotic voice says, "Your delivery is here." And then when the person opens the door, the robot senses that and the hatch pops up and delivery is made. So the robot goes back, you know, down the elevator and back to the lobby, plugs itself in. So it's kind of cool. I mean, it's kind of cool stuff. And the company who we had invested in, Savioke, they had figured out the engineering part of this pretty well. They had made actually a prototype of the robot that could do most of that stuff I just described. But they were at this point where they had recognized an elbow, effectively. They were wondering how the robot should behave around people, you know, because you don't encounter robots in hotels every day. People are not going to be expecting it. And these folks had worked in robotics for a long time. They knew that there's a problem. When people encounter robots, their expectations are often too high. We all expect too much because we've seen too much science fiction. And we think that the robots have thoughts and plans and hopes and dreams, you know. This robot, though, is not able to carry on a conversation. It can't follow a command. It can't answer a question. It's not going to be able to talk back to you at all. And they were afraid that if they gave the robot any kind of personality, that it might frustrate people. People might be disappointed. They knew that when the robot went out into hotels, when they finally launched, that there would be some attention. People would write stories about it. People would write Yelp reviews about it. And they didn't want that storyline to be negative. They didn't want the message that people took away to be negative, because if you're making something as capital intensive as manufacturing a robot and trying to service it and deliver it in hotels, if it doesn't go well, if people don't buy it right away as a startup, they would fail. They would go out of business. So they had to get the launch right. And the safe thing to do was to give it no personality at all. Just make sure that it delivered on expectations and made deliveries. So that was the plan, no personality at all, but they still kind of wondered. And they had a bunch of ideas for how they might make a personality that they thought could potentially work, could potentially be a bit delightful for users, but they just weren't sure. And so they ran a sprint to try it out. So they did the typical things. On Monday, they made a map. They brought the whole team together. And again, this is not just the engineering team, not just one part of the team. Everybody's in the same room. The chief marketing officer, for example, who knows everything about the relationships with hotels and what hotels are expecting and how hotels will be talking about the robot to customers. They mapped out all of the places where an unsuspecting guest might encounter the robot, by surprise, not knowing that there's going to be a robot making the delivery, for example. And in fact, that's the moment that Steve Cousins, the CEO of Savioke, chose as the elbow of the problem. It's the key moment. When you get to your room, when you get to the door and you open it and there's a robot there, that's, oh my God, what's going to happen? That could be either super awkward, who knows what you're wearing, or it could be really great. And it could be really great if it goes well, because you're going to have an interaction with the robot as you get your delivery. So they decided to focus there, and for the rest of the week, they worked on that. On Tuesday, they sketched solutions, and here's what that looked like. Boring, it looks boring, it looks like you're taking a test. But they came up with a bunch of different approaches, and they sketched out some of their old ideas that they had thought of before that hadn't had the chance to really be experimented with or thought through all the way. So on Wednesday, they had to decide from all those different approaches, and Steve chose 3 ideas that he felt were a little bit risky. He thought they could work, and if they worked, they'd be great, but they're not something we can just go and ship with. The first idea was that the robot might be able to play games with you. So maybe if you really enjoyed the delivery from the robot, maybe you could play follow the leader with the robot, or hide and seek with the robot or something. And the idea was that if that worked and people were delighted by that kind of play with the robot, that it could generate really positive reviews. The guests would be super happy. Second idea was to give the robot a face. And this seems really simple, non-controversial, but actually, if you don't want people to talk to the robot, a face is kind of the thing that most says, you can talk to me. They had some ideas. They thought maybe if they gave the robot a not too intelligent face, that might be the way to go. But they weren't comfortable launching with that. They felt it was too big of a risk to launch with, so they tried it in a sprint. And the third idea was to have the robot do a dance after making the delivery. And I just go on the record as saying I thought it was a really dumb idea. The robot doesn't have any arms. So what you're dealing with here, it's got some wheels. What you're dealing with is something like this. And this is how I dance, but I know, I know from experience it's not very effective at charming other people. So I was skeptical. Anyway, on Thursday, they had to prototype all of these personality traits on top of their early prototype robot in just 8 hours. And so they divided up the work. And they've got one person here you can see working on the sound effects for the robot. Another couple of folks here are working on the face. They're actually just using Keynote. They're making slides of the face, putting hotspots in, some animations, and putting all of that onto an iPad mini. So they popped the front panel of the robot off and stuck the iPad mini on, and you can see it here. It looks like the robot has this little sort of simple face and a little speech bubble, so that implies I can sort of put text in here, but I can't talk. That was the idea. They also needed to figure out the dance moves, and normally the robot's moving completely, it's autonomous, right? It's just sensing things and running a program, a script, but they didn't have time and they didn't need to actually program all of that. Instead, Tessa, the CTO who you just saw, she's got basically a PlayStation video game controller. And the idea was that Tessa would sort of hide around the corner, you know, and just sort of like drive from over here and make the deliveries, do the dance without people being able to see. So finally, it's Friday. It's time to run the test. And in order to make this as realistic as possible, they did it in the hotel room. And so early that morning, my colleague at the time, Google Ventures, Michael, he came to the hotel, and this is a picture of him in front of the hotel. And he came into the room, got out all his stuff, and basically set up like you know, taping wires to the wall and putting drop cams in the hallway, and pretty sure the hotel was cool with this. And so there was cameras kind of all over, then we could see the company would be able to watch from different angles how people reacted to the hotel, the unsuspecting like robot delivery. So at 9 a.m., the first person shows up for the test. And if you would just for a second put yourself in the shoes of someone who, well, earlier in the week, you responded to an ad on Craigslist. And you saw there were these, for $100, there's like a usability interview. You're going to be in Cupertino that day anyway, so you're like, great, okay. You fill out a little survey asking you some questions. You get an email back from Michael, and the email says, hey, this is a little unusual, but, you know. And you're like, huh. You're like, huh. This is you on Wednesday. You're like, huh. I don't know. $100 a hotel room. I don't know. Not too sure what's going on here. But if you're like me, you often commit to things in the future that, you know, then when it comes, you regret. So at that time, you're like, oh yeah, okay, well, okay, $100. So, but now it's actually Friday. You're actually in the lobby. Michael shows up. He's like, come with me. You're in the elevator with Michael. You're in the hotel room with Michael, and there's cameras everywhere. So, what were you testing again? What's going on? So this sort of illustrates, though, that actually talking to your customers in this way is always uncomfortable. It will hopefully for you never be like literally this uncomfortable, unless that's your thing. But it will always be uncomfortable to show people something that's not finished, that's not ready yet, is not comfortable. And most of us, if you're a designer, you would probably rather be designing things. If you're a writer, you'd rather be writing things. If you're an engineer, you'd rather be writing code. And if you're a PM, I don't know, meetings or something, I'm not sure what you'd rather be doing. But very few of us would like to be talking to a customer and not giving them a sales pitch for why the product is so good, but actually just watching them maybe trip over it, asking them to be honest and just talk about it. This isn't very comfortable, so many teams won't do it, and if you do it, you can get data before they do. Now, meanwhile, while this interview is going on, Michael tells this first participant, he says, hey, I want you to, where would you, if you had just checked into this room, where would you put your suitcase? And she says, I'd put it, you know, over here, I guess, on this little suitcase stand. Okay, so do you unpack right away or later? I might unpack right away, just, you know, get stuff going. What would you do if you found you had forgotten your toothbrush? And she says, I guess I'd call the front desk and ask them if they could send a toothbrush up. So Michael says, well, why don't you go ahead and just do that? Let's just see how that works at this hotel. So she calls the front desk, and they say, oh, we'll send a toothbrush right up. So meanwhile, we're watching, and the team gets to see what happens from all these different, it looks like the situation room. There's all these different camera angles on the hotel room and the hallway, and we can watch as the robot here moves into position. So it's moving into Tessa's, driving it right into position, and then someone from Savvy Oak calls the room back and says, your delivery is here, kind of a robotic voice. And the person goes over and opens the door. And this is like this moment as if we've peeked into the future and can see what happens if the robot has a personality. How will people react and respond to it? And so it turns out that after 5 interviews, I can just give it all away to you. It's 5 interviews. Nobody wanted to play games with the robot. In hindsight, I guess it makes sense that you wouldn't want to play hide and seek in your hotel room with a robot. but it was one of those things that in the abstract, I could see why it might, you know, but no. The face actually worked. No one tried to talk to the robot. They thought it was cute, but it was dumb enough looking, I guess, that nobody tried to speak to it, which was great. And the dance actually worked. The dance, people liked the dance. I'll show you. This is what the robot looks like now that it's out in real life in service, and you can see the dance. There's the simple face there. And there's a dance. I mean, that is me. But it's so much better when he does it. So anyway, this is it's kind of a silly story. It's a little bit silly, but when they launched, they actually, as predicted, they did get a lot of press coverage. And here they are in the New York Times, and not the front page, but they are in the New York Times, and the story is quite a bit about the personality. That turned out to be a big leader in how people saw and started to adopt the robot. It's had a lot of success. They're in hotels kind of all around the United States now, and had their first sale in Singapore, doing really great. But the story here is really not about robots, because probably, I'm sure, less than half of you make robots in your company. The story here is really about the default. The default is you have to play it safe, you have to be careful, you have to argue and argue and argue, because that launch is going to be a big deal. We all know it's going to take a while to get there, even if it's an MVP. With a sprint, you can take those big risks early on, and they're not really that risky to you. You're only wasting a week if you're wrong. The default is to focus on everything at once, to think about how all the engineering in the robot works, to think about how all the product Encarta will work once you've got it home on your computer. But in a sprint, you can focus on that one key moment, the one spot that really matters most, and it might not even be inside the heart of the engineering or the heart of the part that we want to think about because it's so challenging. It might be somewhere else. It's effectively like watching the elbow. It's not getting distracted by the hand, which seems like it would make sense, seems like where we should put our eyes, but it's actually maybe somewhere else. And the sprint gives us a chance to change all of the defaults, redesign the way we use our time, and focus where we really should. So if you like, I encourage you to either try a sprint. If you want to try a design sprint, check it out. But you can also just think about how you might redesign the way you use your time so that your team and yourself aren't always reacting to the defaults, the way the calendar happens to be set up, the fact that we expect each other to respond to email right away. All these things have a cost, and sometimes they distract us from what matters the most. If you want to check out the book, a little bit of self-promotion, here it is, take a look at it, and if you really get into it, you can sign up for this newsletter. And I send out stories about companies who are doing sprints and events and things that are going on. And I'm also writing another book that's about redesigning time, and you will even get news about the new book. How exciting is that? Thank you all so much for your attention, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you.